Okay, I'm talking to you today about 4 men. 3 of them are real, and 1 of them is fictional. And I promise I'll give equal time to 4 women later on. Reading from Deuteronomy 34. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite of Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah, and as far west as the western sea, the Negev and the plains. That is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. The Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command. Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was unequaled for all of the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt, against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land, and for all the mighty deeds and all the terrifying displays of power that Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. Thus ends the reading of Deuteronomy. Who would have thought that Mrs. Levi's son would have turned out the way he did? The son of Israelites, marked for death, set adrift on the Nile. Who would have imagined that he would be rescued by a princess, raised as a member of the Egyptian royal family, the adopted grandson of the Pharaoh? With such an upbringing, who would have thought that he would even be concerned about those who served the Pharaoh and how they were treated? We may have seen him as a man living in 2 worlds, but did he see himself as that man? Did his mother, who nursed him as one of Pharaoh's slaves, tell him who he really was? Did she dare to let him know his real heritage, or did she protect him by staying silent? Was Moses' sudden reaction to the mistreatment of the slaves by a taskmaster because he was a defender of the weak? Or was he awakening to who he really was? If anyone could get away with murder, it would have been the grandson of a pharaoh, don't you think? I don't believe it was the felony that made Moses run. It was his realization that he could no longer deny who he really was and who he was destined to be. And had he not run, he might never have found out. Moses' encounter with the God of Israel in the wilderness set him up as the one to lead a daring escape of slaves out of Egypt. Perhaps the greatest escape in all human history. Ever after, Moses spent time with the God of Israel on mountaintops, keeping the vision of the promised land before his people and helping them become God's people once again. He died atop a mountain in Moab, never having set foot in the promised land. Reading from Matthew 22. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, They gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them this question: "What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he?" They said to him, "Well, the son of David." And he said to them, "How is it then that David, by the Spirit, calls him Lord, saying, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand, until I put your enemies under your feet'? If David thus calls him Lord, how can he be his son?" No one was able to give him an answer, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. Thus ends the reading of Matthew. Now, perhaps Matthew's gospel is placed first in the Christian scriptures because the author makes it clear from the beginning of his story that Jesus is not only a descendant of King David, anointed by the Holy Spirit as the Son of God on the day of his baptism as well, but also that he is the new Moses. Last January, I preached that it is no accident that Matthew's Jesus delivers his Sermon on the Mount strategically placed on a mountain top. And to that sermon is a series of not 10, not 20, but 30 commandments delivered to all who have ears to hear. Now, if that doesn't sound like a new Moses, I don't know who does. Today, I read to you from chapter 22 of Matthew's Gospel. The action of the story takes place after Palm Sunday, after the Palm Sunday parade and Jesus' cleansing of the temple. He's been teaching for days in the temple, and the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the elders are growing tired of his presence. In their eyes, he is a man who has no respect for them. He is a man of no real credentials. And no matter how sincere he is, he has no respect for authority. And yet, he dares to speak as one who has it. According to Matthew, these verses are the last time anyone tries to put Jesus on the spot. The dual commandment is not really a surprise, as both come from the Torah, specifically Deuteronomy and Leviticus. Here, Jesus splices the two together to make one great commandment that rolls the other 30 that he recited in the Sermon on the Mount into one. The great commandment isn't hard to remember. It isn't even hard to recite. It isn't the least bit complicated, but it sure is hard to live. Jesus demonstrated for us how to live the commandment, to love one's neighbor, even to the extreme. In the temple and in this scene with the Pharisees, he doesn't lash out at those who verbally challenge him, trying to provoke him. In the end, he asks a question, as it turns out, the last question to the Pharisees. It's difficult to understand for many. Lots of people don't understand the passage. But his question to the Pharisees is a conundrum. He asked, "What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he?" They went straight for the traditional answer. Since King David was the anointed king and therefore the Messiah, that is, God's Messiah, then the Messiah of Israel would be his son, that is, the descendant of David. So they answer the traditional answer. Who is the Messiah? The son of David. But Matthew's Jesus quotes to them from a psalm credited to David, written by King David, one well known to all, Psalm 110. He quotes verse 1. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The question Jesus asks is this: if David is the Messiah, the anointed of God, then who is he calling my Lord in the psalm? He would not call his son my Lord. In these verses of chapter 22, Matthew has established Jesus' authority in a circular argument, which cannot be countered even by these scholars of the law. They cannot dispute what Jesus has said, for they know the words of the psalm. Even our Christian creedal statements adopted verse 1 of Psalm 110, asserting that the risen Christ is the one who sits at the right hand of God. Jesus did not use his power or his authority to injure those who opposed him. He spoke the truth to open people's eyes, hearts, and minds to the grace and love of God, the good news that was to be for all people. When Martin Luther wrote his 95 Theses, it's only legend that he nailed them to the front door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. He was a thoughtful teacher and a lecturer at Wittenberg University, who, when, as a young priest, he had the privilege to travel to Rome, was appalled to hear his fellow priests hawking indulgences in the streets, saying, when a coin into the coffer rings, another soul from purgatory springs. Like Moses and Jesus before him, Luther was called to serve God, and did so as a monk and a Catholic priest. He didn't set out to turn the world upside down, to spin what became known as the Reformation. It was his reaction to the desperate, theological, misdirected behavior of the church in Rome that found him questioning and searching for answers. Trying to raise money to repair St. Peter's Basilica, the church corrupted the idea of supporting the church financially, like that precious get-out-of-jail-free card in the game of Monopoly. Indulgences promised a shortened time in purgatory, that shadowy place of waiting invented by the church where the dead await God's verdict on the worth of their life. Luther proposed that the church's behavior be discussed seriously, discussed among students and scholars in Germany. The discussion spread and took hold in the minds of many, opening their eyes. Rome reacted badly and eventually excommunicated Luther, branding him a heretic in 1521. However, his recommended reforms had already begun to take hold, and the Reformation, now well underway, gave birth to what is now referred to as Protestantism. Not wrangling for a fight, but moved by a force greater than themselves, these men moved the people. Moses literally moved God's people from slavery to promise. Jesus moved God's people from a place of distance from God to a place of powerful personal connection. Martin Luther moved people beyond ignorance and compliance based on fear to spiritual self-discovery and scriptural exploration. If not for Luther, you and I might not have Bibles we could actually read. One final story is about a fictional character. How many of you watch Designated Survivor? There are some really good shows on television, and this is definitely one of them. Designated Survivor is the story of the man left standing after the Capitol has been destroyed by a terrorist bomb. The designated survivor of a bombing becomes the President of the United States. He is President Kirkland, played by Kiefer Sutherland. In last week's episode, President Kirkland made a remark to a friend, a senator, in the locker room after they'd played a game of hockey together. He was trying to get the senator to support an initiative to bail out people whose pensions had been robbed by unscrupulous money managers. The senator, for an unknown reason, appears on television, takes the president's words out of context, and in essence, throws the president under the bus. He tells the American people that their president called them suckers. There's a great hue and cry from the public, and there's a media frenzy as well as much discussion amongst the president's advisors in the White House as to how he should respond. The situation is being given the name Suckergate. And the people are beginning to jump onto a bandwagon that could render the president impotent, powerless to effect or make change to improve the lives of those pensioners on the brink of financial ruin. He speaks to his friend, the senator, who will not back down from what he said. The staff is pushing the president to retaliate. President Kirkland takes another tack and goes to the people directly to encourage them and to assure them. But the road trip backfires. The White House staffers produce some dirt on the senator and encourage the president to take the dirt to the people to regain their support. He goes on television and begins by saying to the American people, "I have something to tell you." And we wait with bated breath, wondering if he will use the dirt. If you haven't watched this episode and don't want to know what happens, put your fingers in your ears, because I'm going to tell you what happens. The president takes the high road and admits to the American people that he called them suckers because they have hoped and they have believed in the American dream. He admits to being a sucker himself, believing that the dream is possible. His ratings skyrocket, and the senator appears at his office to apologize. He confesses to Kirkland why he stabbed him in the back and turned a casual remark into a political opportunity. His personal life was in a shambles, and he needed a win. Kirkland suddenly sees the tragedy that has become his friend's life, and he hands over the folder full of dirt that he didn't use and never will, and tells the senator to get his life in order. Imitation of the Christ is not easy, but it is what we are called to do in every circumstance of life. It's like my mother taught me. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. In this case, if you can't say something truthful, don't say anything at all. These men dared from the heart to speak the truth. The heart where God was at work in them. The greatness of these three men is recorded in history. The greatness of President Kirkland is recorded on the TV. Only one of these men is perfect. Amen.